Okay. Hi, Dr. Agaibi. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good, good. So we're like, why am I so zoomed in? Okay. I'm trying. I hope everyone is having a wonderful week. We are live 8:30 Eastern Standard Time here on Orthodox Women's Ministry. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for always supporting us, following us, encouraging us, praying for us. I ask you, please continue to pray for us and support us and spread the word about our ministry. And again, we're always open to new ideas and any requests. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Christine Agaibi, which we are very excited to talk about mental health and much needed topic, especially during our difficult years that we've been facing as, you know, in the Western world, well, globally, actually. And I think especially as women, such a vital topic on women's roles and burnout. I know as a mother, personally, I've felt that many times, if not maybe now, hopefully not now, but I know I'm excited for this lecture. So thank you so much, Dr. Christine, coming and joining us this special time. Just a brief biography just doesn't do me justice. So I'm going to lead you also to her website, which I encourage you all to view her scholarship, her articles, her research. And she's done so much on women and Coptic women resilience, orthodoxy, and all those things, which are so vital for our community globally. And she's such a great asset to us. So we are very grateful to her. Dr. Christine Agaibi received her master's and her doctorate in counseling psychology. She's currently the chair of special interest on religious and spiritual issues in counseling psychology in the American Psychological Association, APA, which is amazing. Counseling psychological division. For over 23 years, Dr. Agaibi has been interested in her research in resilience, all of us need, positive psychology, religion, spirituality, women's issues, and diversity. Dr. Christine has also presented at, I think, dozens, over 45 all over the world, in the US, and over 200 times in many communities across the US and globally. She has been a very faithful woman and someone who we definitely look up to. I'm just going to turn it off. Sorry, I'm having technical. Sorry. Of course, we have like technical people talking in the background. Anyway, sorry about that. Let's go back. She's presented in over, dozens and hundreds of conferences, literally. So some of you might actually know her by name, by face, by YouTube, by social media, and here now Women's Ministry. So we're very fortunate. So like I said earlier, check out her website, Care Resilience. Care Resilience. Am I saying it correctly?
It's like Care Resilience, CA Resilience, yeah. So my initials and then
Resilience. Like an overlap. I just noticed that.
Yeah.
Just tricky. It's funny. It's good to remember. .com, and then of course check out her Instagram. She posts wonderful, positive, uplifting messages that we need daily. And I will hand it over to her. But before I do as well, I encourage you as well. After the lecture, we will give some time for any questions or any thoughts, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that very lovely, warm introduction. You're an inspiration as well, so I appreciate that being invited here and to talk during Mental Health Month specifically, which has been dedicated since, I believe, the 40s to focus on our mental health and to have awareness to how to thrive and live our best lives. So hopefully today we'll end on a positive note about how to deal with burnout, because we all can experience it from time to time. And then in the following two talks, the next two Wednesdays, we'll really focus in on how to become more balanced, more resilient, prioritize things a little bit. So even more positive in the next two lectures. But this is, like I said, a perfect time to talk about this. It is the middle of Mental Health Month, so kind of going on the tail end of it here, ending in a few days or so. But let's talk about some statistics at first, because it's important to know that we're not alone if we're suffering with certain things. We are not by ourselves. In fact, just today, I heard a statistic that 58 million Americans are suffering with some sort of mental illness at a given time. At this time, actually, that translates to about 1 in 5 Americans 18 or older suffering from some sort of diagnosable mental illness in any given year. And mental illnesses can co-occur. So you can have like depression and anxiety together. and have other disorders, for example, with trauma and things like that that can occur as well. And about 9 or almost 10% have some sort of depressive illness, from bipolar to depression and things related to that, or even a low kind of level of depression called dysthymia. And women, because this is a women's group, will suffer twice as likely with depression than men will, even though the bipolar rates are about the same for men and women. So 1 in 5 adults have some sort of mental illness. About 1 in 20 suffer from serious mental illness. And 50% of all of our lifetime mental illnesses begin by age 14. And by age 24, 75% of mental illnesses have appeared. So, women in their 30s and 40s and beyond have probably experienced some sort of disorder at some point. And so it's really, really important that we get help and, again, bring awareness to that, especially during Mental Health Month. I want to start out by saying that not all stress can be, detrimental. Stress can be beneficial to a point. And so that's a little bit of stress where we're not depleting more than we're refilling. And so oftentimes we are depleting too much, and that's what leads to burnout. So stress can be healthy if it is a motivator, if it's getting you to a point that gets you motivated to work or to do other things, or sometimes you may experience a deadline or something, and that little bit of stress gets you motivated and gets you going to do what you need to do. It helps you to stay focused. And so there's this healthy kind of tension, but that's only healthy if we have coping skills, if we have supports, and I'll be talking a lot more about that throughout this time. If you don't have enough stress, you can actually become bored, which is the other end of the spectrum that we don't want to be. So one end is extreme boredom, or being inactive, or not having anything meaningful to do, which is not good. Boredom in itself, that's another argument. You can be a little bit bored, and that's okay. It can make you creative. But too much boredom, not enough meaning, that can become problematic. The other end of the spectrum is where you don't have enough social supports, you don't have enough coping mechanisms, you don't have enough abilities to refill, like I said. That leads to exhaustion, that leads to panic, that leads to anxiety, that leads to the burnout that we're going to be talking about today. And can even lead to mental health disease, mental illness, or physical illness, because the two are very much related, and one ties into the other. And oftentimes I'll see clients that have physical issues that don't have any medical explanation, like rashes or headaches, or GI symptoms is the common one too. And they don't know where that's coming from. So it can be something psychological as well, and it can make you really sick. Every year, the American Psychological Association will put out a stress survey. I'm going to kind of reference the one from last year. They usually come out around March. I don't think I've delved into this year's one too much yet. But in addition to everything else, we know the last 3 years have been quite interesting and very stressful. And we're just kind of coming out of that now. But what has happened over those last 3 years is last year's poll said that about 63% of adults have been forever impacted by COVID and have lost things that they can't recover or return from. And that could be things like grief and loss, continued financial hardships, continued relationship issues. We've had things like supply chain issues that are annoying, but that kind of stuff can affect us. There's been wars, there's been global uncertainty, and of course we had isolation for a significant period of time that has affected a lot of people. So 63% have said that their lives have been forever impacted by COVID, and they don't know how to fix that, or have not gotten to a place where they can fix it yet. Lots of different things can affect our burnout, can create burnout, and we'll talk specifically about these 6 things. But first thing that comes to mind is not having enough meaning and purpose in our life. So we have this excessive workload where we don't have, again, the ability to rebuild or to refill our reservoirs, and we're just kind of depleting, and there's a slow leak that is draining us little by little. And burnout can be this almost silent problem, and it kind of sneaks up on you until it's really, really serious and you feel really broken and down and things like that. So excessive workload is a huge one that can lead to burnout. If you have a lack of recognition in your life, whether it's at work or even at home or even with family, and you're constantly doing things but you're not being recognized for them, that is problematic. If you have poor relationships that are, again, more depleting than fulfilling, that can create a lot of burnout as well. If we have a lack of sense of control, and everything feels chaotic and I don't have enough time to do anything, and things are very difficult, then that can create some burnout as well. If you're in an unfair conditions kind of situation, like at work, where you're maybe overlooked for promotions, or again, people are not recognizing you or seeing you, that's a big one. To be seen and to be understood and to be heard is really, really important. Or if you have mismatched values between your like aspirational goals and what you're actually living, that can create a lot of burnout as well. And some people think that it's very much related to depression. It can be, but they're two different things. So with depression, it's a diagnosable kind of mental health condition, usually when symptoms have gone on for at least 2 weeks or more, where, you know, and everybody experiences depression from time to time, or anxiety from time to time. But usually our benchmark is looking at functioning. So if somebody is unable to function anymore, they're not engaging with family and friends, if they're, you know, not going to work, they're staying at home all the time, not doing the things that they are able to do in the past, or no longer doing the things that they once enjoyed. That can be something that is more closely related to depression. Sometimes it affects appetite, it affects sleep. Somebody can be very easily fatigued, have low concentration, feel hopeless, feel worthless, feel guilty, have low self-esteem. And all of those things can just make them very sluggish and not want to function, and things like that. So again, from time to time, everyone will experience depression, but it becomes clinical when it's surpassed 2 weeks or more, and functioning is affected. We often look at things like the frequency of their symptoms. If their frequency of symptoms has increased, before they were depressed once or twice a month, now they're depressed almost every day. The frequency has increased. The intensity of their symptoms must have increased as well. So maybe in the past they would have had, you know, just mild depression here and there, and they could still function, but the intensity has increased. That becomes more of a clinical issue. And if the duration has decreased, before you could almost, you know, shake off the depression and move on with your life, and this time you're unable to shake it. So we know that that is depression, and needs to be treated as well. And from research, we know that, so burnout is a little bit different. I'll talk about that in a minute. But statistically, we know that women are much more stressed and burned out than their male counterparts. They're more affected than their male counterparts because they tend to still take on the domestic duties a lot more, in addition to potentially working and doing both together. Despite the more equality that we have now in the world, the domestic duties and the children and things like that still fall on the women more. A recent LinkedIn study looked at 5,000 American women, and 74% of them had reported being extremely stressed out, or at least somewhat stressed out, in comparison to 61% of men. Another survey found that mothers that were in paid employment, gainful employment, were 23% more likely to experience burnout than the dads in that same category. And 2.35 million working mothers in the US have suffered burnout since the pandemic. So 2 million, almost approaching 3 million, due to unequal demands, both at home and at work. And being a mom myself, I definitely experienced that during the pandemic. I was homeschooling and seeing clients, and just had to turn everything over on a dime, literally overnight, to homeschooling and to switching to seeing clients from home. Thankfully, I wasn't teaching at that time, but now I've added university teaching to the mix.
Multiple roles, right?
yes, multiple roles. We wear multiple hats, and that's part of the problem, is that we don't shut off and replenish, like I said, because we're just jumping from one thing to the next to the next. So there's no space for that downtime or meaningfulness, or just time to breathe and relax in between things. Additionally, women still make about 82 cents to $1 in comparison to men. So there's a financial component to that. Research also tells us they're less likely to be promoted, or slower to be promoted, than men. And women are more likely to head single parent families more than men. So as well, so that's an issue as well, where they're juggling multiple roles and think that we can do it all, until burnout, like I said, is the silent pandemic that kind of sneaks up onto you until it's too late. And again, there's multiple ways you can start figuring out when there is a problem with mental health. physical symptoms, body symptoms, things like headaches, frequent infections, just being sick all the time, fatigue, muscle twitches. All of these things can be explaining that you have stress or burnout. Another one is kind of foggy thinking or muddled thinking, if you will. You just feeling like you're not clear all the time. That's another kind of idea that there's a problem going on. You're unable to make decisions, or you make decisions too quickly and then they're not good decisions. There's a lot of negativity that could be happening, a lot of worrying all the time. Again, anxiety and depression and burnout, they kind of all go hand in hand. Impaired judgment, inability to drive, which can be very dangerous, of course. So people can become accident prone, and just little things here and there, like hitting a curb every once in a while or something, but you're becoming more impaired, unable to function as clearly as you were before. Loss of appetite, people may turn to substances, unfortunately. Again, lots of insomnia, a lot of restlessness, and those can be things as well. Depression, alienation from other people. And so ironically, you would think, let's turn to more people to be as supports. But when people are distressed, the first thing they do is run for the hills and go hide, and they don't want to talk to anyone or see anyone, which feeds more into this problem, unfortunately. People can be really apathetic and just not care anymore, or just more complaining and more fussiness, loss of confidence, all of these things associated with potential mental health concerns. And we often see these symptoms, like I said, in people that come to see us. Again, we're looking for an increase in frequency, an increase in our intensity of the symptoms, the duration of the symptoms, being isolated and withdrawn, acting out destructively. Anger is often a big symptom. People are very easily irritated and very easily triggered because they're not able to deal with their emotions. Erratic behavior, like I said, things like that. And so the difficulty in functioning just piling on more and more and more until it's very, very difficult to deal with all these symptoms together. So then what does burnout look like? A little bit different again than depression, but it's a state of emotional, physical, mental exhaustion, and it's in an excessive and prolonged state. You feel extremely overwhelmed, extremely emotionally drained, unable to meet the constant demands. It used to be like a trickle out of a faucet. Now it's Niagara Falls, and you cannot breathe anymore. And so you have no energy. You feel helpless, hopeless. And a big thing with burnout is a sense of cynicism, very cynical. I can't get over this. This is not going to get better. It's not going to get easier. And people start turning to be resentful, and they have nothing more to give, which spills over into every area of their life. And every day can be seen as a bad day. Every day feels like a draining energy. You're exhausted all the time. You can't think clearly. And again, there's symptoms that are physical and symptoms that are psychological, and they both kind of blend together that affect us. And so people may start to feel a sense of withdrawal from their responsibilities. That could be even their family responsibilities, even their work responsibilities. Even urgent deadlines don't seem to matter anymore. And again, there's a negative outlook on everything, and people take their frustration out on others. They start skipping out on the duties that they have to do, and they procrastinate and take longer because they can't deal with those emotions or those feelings anymore. So while stress sometimes feels because you're over-engaged, you're doing too much, burnout is the other end. You've now just stopped working completely. You've burned out to the point that you don't want to work anymore. With stress, your emotions are actually overactive. You may be agitated, you may be angry, you may be all of those things. With burnout, your emotions are completely blunted. You have no more energy to even produce an emotion. Stress makes you feel urgency, a sense of urgency. I have to get this done now. I have a deadline. I have to complete this. I have to do the laundry for the kids or whatever it is. But with burnout, you're more helpless. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. There's a sense of hopelessness, a lack of motivation. So it's a lack of meaning, a lack of purpose, a lack of hope, which are much deeper emotions than just the loss of energy, I would say. Burnout leads to more detachment and away from people, loved ones. The damage can be really emotional or psychological. And it may make you feel like, things are too overwhelming to even try at that point. So once it gets to that dangerous level, you really have to probably change some lifestyle things to give yourself more time to introduce meaning and purpose again, and introduce ways to cope in a healthy manner. You have to first recognize that you're burned out. I always tell my clients, you can change a lot of things, almost anything you can change, but you have to recognize that there's a problem first and then start working to fix it. So the next step after recognizing it is to really reverse back and start building resilience. You really need to turn to people, positive, influential, supportive, consistent, empathic, warm people. The key word there is consistent. A lot of people are there in the short term, they're not there in the long term, and this is a long-term problem. So you have to be around warm people, people that are going to be supportive, that are going to help you to reframe your problem and find areas where you can get some help and some relief so you can start introducing meaning again. Again, you want to reevaluate your priorities. Don't try to do everything at once. Rome wasn't built in a day, and you can't fix this problem in a day. So take breaks from technology and social media in particular. Reintroduce nourishment, reintroduce amounts of sleep. It doesn't matter if there's a deadline. Introduce relaxation time and meaning and purpose time. Focus on health, physical health, and the mental health will come along with that. Avoid substances, avoid things that will agitate you more. Sleep, be more balanced in taking exercise and healthy meals and things like that. The question I get a lot when I give talks is this feeling of burnout or depression or anxiety or any of these mental health issues, does that indicate a lack of faith or that this is a sin of some sort? Sin, this could be caused by sin, but not always. So we shouldn't mix the two necessarily. It is not necessarily a sin. It could be a medical condition, just like any other physical medical condition. And so it could stem from a lack of faith, but not necessarily. And so that's really important to examine as well, because it's not always related to something sinful. It could be, again, related to the pandemic or just coming out of the pandemic or residuals from the pandemic. And just getting back into work and getting back into your normal routines. It could be related to a separation from God, but again, not always. We just had Holy Week recently, and you saw the distress that Jesus had in Gethsemane. So we can have that level of pain and that level of distress. We're human, and we're living in a broken world that sometimes gets too overwhelming. So we have to recognize that sometimes we can't just snap out of it, and that we do require prayer, yes, but also with treatment and support and help from other people. So it's not just, that this is a sin or something that you can, pray your way out of only. Prayer is, of course, important, but we need treatment in addition to that, especially when it's gotten too much. When we've done research on how people respond to adversity, research tells us that people respond usually in one of four ways. Some people just succumb and give up and just, it's just too much and they can't deal with it. Other people will survive and just continue to function, sometimes in kind of just an autopilot kind of zone. They survive and just continue to function. And sometimes that's impaired and sometimes it's not, and they just function. Other people have a dip in their, let's say there's a baseline. They dip from their baseline and then come back up to baseline and stay there. My research in resilience tries to look at how people thrive. So they may dip below baseline, and everybody will at some point or another. Research tells us that most people, if not all people, will experience some sort of threat to their wellness at some point in life. Again, about 58 million Americans currently in this moment have a mental illness, and those are the people that we've recognized, not the people that have not gotten help. There's probably more that have not gotten help. So again, my research in resilience and my work in resilience that's a word that's thrown around a lot, I know, in media and in research and things like that, but it's a true scientific field and looks at the scientific way that people use their strengths to thrive and to return above baseline and beyond. And so you can even experience trauma, and there's a concept of post-traumatic growth, that people can go through a growth period even after a difficult situation or even a traumatic situation. So we can thrive. And one way to kind of do that is to really care about ourselves from the inside and outside. So inside, we really need to implement regular self-care. We sometimes put all of our self-care to the back burner. We take care of everybody else, especially as women. We take care of our kids and our family members and our work and all of those things, and we put ourselves last. And we feel guilty if we put ourselves on the front burner. So we put ourselves to the back burner until we get to this place of burnout. So we really need to take care of our insides, our mind, our mental health, know when we're struggling, reach out to other people for help, reach out to our fathers of confessions, reach out to our family members, reach out to our best friends, people that will support us and encourage us and push us along when we are falling apart. The other thing is we need to take care of the outside. So we need to have a community. We always say it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to raise an adult too. And so we need to bring in a community like this platform and like Orthodox Women's Ministry to support each other and encourage each other. And we forget about the community, especially when we're stressed. So regular self-care, be compassionate on yourself. Again, we're compassionate on everybody else and give everybody else a break, but not ourselves. And so we need to schedule time truly for ourselves, for meaningful relationships, for meaningful activities, for things that we enjoy. We need to create that supportive village and that supportive community and not create more stigma. Another part of Mental Health Month is to dispel the stigma that, I can't be having problems because I'm a Christian or because I have a family or because I can't be all of these things. So let's get rid of the stigma and ask for help when we need it and call upon that help when we need it. If you are having a trigger, be mindful of speaking to that trigger before it piles up and then becomes a bigger and bigger problem. So I always tell my clients, deal with problems as they come. Don't let them build and build and build. You build resentment and pain and trauma and difficulty that way as well. So identify what your triggers are. What are the things that are challenging you, and keep them in check with good coping skills, which we will talk more about the coping skills in session 2 and 3. Find meaningful activities to engage in, whatever that is, and don't deplete without replenishing with something meaningful and purposeful and fulfilling. So again, that's the problem. We often are used to, it feels like a trickle, like I said, like from a faucet, that we're depleting, but it becomes like a flood after a while if we're not paying attention to that. And it's very important. Like I said, the first thing that we do is we run and escape when we're having a problem. We run and hide and we don't have conversations or connections. So I encourage everyone again to reach out and have conversations and have connections with other people. That will help a lot. The other thing we should do is prioritize our activities. You don't have to do everything at once. If I was showing a PowerPoint, I would show a picture of this woman with like 50 different hats, and she's holding a laptop and a baby in one hand and all kinds of stuff around. And that's, again, very difficult. We have to prioritize. I can't do everything at the same time, but I can do a few things at the same time well. But not everything has to be done at once. And you have to prioritize your schedule to make time for yourself. The other thing we need to minimize is media. I know this is a big issue with teenagers and pre-teenagers and middle schoolers and things like that, and high schoolers. But we as adults also need to minimize the doom scrolling, as they call it, just scrolling through social media all day long. That's been shown to have negative effects to our mental health. That's not a good thing either. So specifically for teenagers, but for adults as well. I think I read a recent study where we should not be especially doing it at night before bed. It keeps us awake and prevents us from sleeping well, which also contributes to the problem. And probably the last two things we can talk about before we answer some questions is we need to savor. There's some research in the positive psychology world on something called savoring, which means just slowing down and enjoying things and being mindful of what we're doing, not just rushing through life and everything is in high speed and high rush, but literally take time to stop and smell the roses. There's research that says that we are able to bank those positive experiences like you would bank your finances and withdraw from them when we're having a negative, difficult time, challenging time. So savoring is really important to kind of encode and imprint these memories that are positive. Have a lunch with a friend, have coffee with a friend, and savor that memory and savor those conversations. Really, really important as well. We'll also be talking about resilience in the third talk specifically, but there's so many tools, again, that we can use to practice more resilience. Again, increasing our relationships, doing healthy things that will help us to cope a little bit more. And again, everybody's going to experience something difficult at some point or another in their life. but we have to be able to prioritize and create more balance in certain areas. Um, in in our field, we talk a lot about 8 areas of wellness that we have to focus on, and oftentimes we're focusing on 1 or 2 and forgetting all the rest. And so we don't have a lot of wellness because we're not focusing on those things. For example, people will focus on their career or their job or their finances and neglect things like their spirituality or their social life or their intellectual things that will, boost your thinking processes and things like that. So those are all things that we tend to neglect doing, and that will be more for the second and the third talk, to figure out ways to have more coping skills and to decrease the burnout before it starts, hopefully, but hopefully if it has started, we recognize it and we reverse and create more resilience. So
Thank you so much. Sorry, I had to mute myself because I just had a really bad cough. I have a flood of questions. That was incredible. I mean, it was much needed. It was clear. It was empathetic. I know we have one question here, I believe. Go ahead and let me see. Okay. So if you have any questions, go ahead and send it to the chat here. But as I wait for anything that comes up, my gosh, I have so many thoughts and just so much. So I guess the first thing that comes to my mind, I know you talked about depression and the statistics with mental health. I guess one thing with burnout, and I know you said that it's different sides of the spectrum with stress. So if I correctly, does burnout have, I guess, I don't want to say, of course, similar symptoms to depression, but also, I guess it overlaps with depression and anxiety? Would you say that, or?
Yeah, they can definitely be connected, and have similar symptoms in some areas. But the almost despondency that comes with burnout and the cynicism and withdrawal from responsibilities, or you're procrastinating until things take too long, or you're masking the pain with substances or food or some other addiction. It's more about the cynicism that comes along with it, and there's a real sense of detachment that's a little bit different than depression. So that's where that kind of departs a little bit from depression. It has its own makeup and things like that. And again, it sneaks up on you. It sneaks up on you because you've been doing all this work and carrying on and doing all these things. And then all of a sudden you're like, I just can't function. I can't function anymore. And that's where you have this sense of, I've done too much and I've gone overboard and now I can't do anything. Yeah. So that's where it departs a little bit from depression, which is more of a mood disorder. Sadness is the hallmark there, but this is more of a, not only sadness, but a loss of motivation and helplessness and hopelessness and overwhelmed and cynicism. And it bleeds into every aspect of your life, from work to family to, I just can't do anymore.
Yeah. No, definitely, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Someone is asking if they can work with you, but I will direct them off our live. Yes, you probably can.
Okay.
So,
yes.
That's interesting. So I wonder, and I know you said women are definitely susceptible, and which definitely makes sense. Not to put you completely on the spot, but I wonder, you said about, what was it, 53 million? Was that that number? How do we know what's pre-pandemic, I guess, statistically, as far as like mental health issues? I'm assuming obviously exacerbated after the pandemic. And
yeah,
is it?
I think 58 million is current. I just heard that statistic today. Yeah. So yeah.
I'm assuming, it exacerbated because I just personally, I just feel like a lot of people are just coping or struggling to cope or just surviving or existing. And there's I have noticed, especially a lot of people are just in isolation, which, like you said, I really loved what you said about it takes a village to also raise an adult. And I think this a kind of, I mean, maybe this is a generalization, but a lot of times just the way we live our lives, especially as women, just, running, errands, work, especially wear many hats. We don't take the priority for our care. And that you said, like that coffee with a friend or anything, it's just like, we're always busy. And it's like, well,
Mhm.
we are, but what's our priorities, I think.
Mhm.
And I think that, yeah, that's definitely important
Mhm.
to highlight. Um,
Mhm.
I know in our church communities, I've said this in different places where I've lived, that we have, thank God, we have a lot of youth services,
Mhm.
but I don't personally enough services for,
Yeah.
mothers or young
Yeah.
mothers or,
Mhm.
graduates, or I know there's sort of like young professionals, but again,
Mhm.
there's such a need, and it's our
Yeah.
most. I was talking to one of the priest's wives in California, and she was saying we started a ministry for young mothers because that's
Mhm.
your most vulnerable and
Yeah.
and sometimes obviously postpartum and all those things. So I was like, that's
Mhm.
fantastic.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, like if you suggest any, I guess, ideas, maybe we'll talk about that in forthcoming lectures. But
Mhm.
any programs or things we could do, definitely in women's ministry, but even in our local
Mhm.
community, like there's something you suggest. I would love to hear that as well.
Mhm. Yeah, something definitely to think about. We definitely need more programs for moms, moms at all stages. I have two 13-year-old twin girls, and that's a stage in itself. So, um, every stage needs some support, and we just need to support each other.
Yeah.
And everybody's suffering in their own little pockets and not interacting with each other. And again, there's rampant stigma out there that I shouldn't reach out for help, or I can't add a little bit more. And what's a little bit more? The little bit more eventually adds to a lot and adds to more and more burnout. And so we really, really need to reach out and support one another and help one another, to help each other to grow spiritually, psychologically, all of those things.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So,
absolutely.
and this is
So
one way to start with this ministry. So,
absolutely. No, I hope that we can, especially as women, build each other up instead of, otherwise, and that we, like you said at one point, to recognize that there is a problem.
mm-hmm.
And personally, obviously, there's many things, but especially in the West, I think there's so many layers.
Mm-hmm.
Of, woman. I always say this, whether people agree with me or not. I just think it's almost impossible to work a full-time job and
Yeah,
raise a child. It just
yeah,
doesn't make sense. And I know
it doesn't.
we have like whatever time maternity leave, if that,
Mm-hmm.
which is ridiculous because many
Yeah,
countries don't have that. That's a whole nother topic.
yeah,
But I think that back to burnout and all those other
yeah,
things, because like
yep.
you hear these stories. I
Mm-hmm.
had I had a friend, the doctor, she had to go back
Mm-hmm.
after 2 weeks. She gave
Yeah.
birth. That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
insane. Like
Yeah.
her body recover.
Yep. Yep.
So
Yeah.
I I wonder as a community, besides society, how we
Mm-hmm.
could kind of study that, or like you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, like change our priorities or lifestyles. That would be
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Yeah. And yet people have to make ends meet and have to pay bills. And again, we have to balance all of it, the finances and the family and the work and how do we do that? We need support
yeah,
on a larger global scale, and then within our smaller communities, and then within our homes and within ourselves. So
yeah,
it's like little circles that need to kind of expand and have a ripple effect. But yes, it is a challenge to do all of those things, and it leads to burnout. But
yeah.
yeah,
No, I love that.
so
I see us hopefully working together in women's ministry and building
hmm
up programs. I'd love to
yeah,
do more with you, and I know more
absolutely,
people, and those listening in, come on and contribute. Sorry,
yeah,
I just have this cough.
okay,
One thing I also loved that you mentioned, and it's so crucial, as a Christian, as an Orthodox woman, all those things, is the emotional, I guess, crises that we might face, and that, and a lot of times it's like sort of a dichotomy within us that we feel bad for, or shame
hmm
or guilt or whatever it might be
yeah,
that we have. Oh, like you said, like Christians shouldn't be depressed. I actually
hmm
had a friend said this to me many years ago, like, oh yeah, Christians shouldn't feel depressed.
hmm
And I kind of sat with that. I'm like, I don't know personally. Obviously, I'm not a trained therapist, psychologist, but I loved what you mentioned about Christ, because looking at Christ, who is the perfect human being, right? He embodied
hmm
everything,
right,
still had the emotions, and
hmm
he was out of control of emotions, right? He
hmm
wept, he angered, he
hmm
rejoiced, and he was overwhelmed in Gethsemane, right? As drops
hmm
of blood. We see that as a fact. So even looking at
hmm
Christ, the God man, he's also showing his utmost humanity. And
right,
obviously, there's in the Bible, David, you could say, had forms of
hmm
depression, or Elijah, you know,
yeah,
um, saints, and
hmm
St. Paul struggled,
yeah,
and so it's to obviously to death. Um, I think we really underplay that as a community. And it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting as Copts, I'll say this from a Coptic perspective, because of, a lot of things that are intertwined liturgically, our history, our persecution, and every church community
Mm-hmm.
has its history, of course, and its
Mm-hmm.
culture. But as Copts, we have this kind of double-edged thing. Like we pride ourselves in our persecution, but obviously
Yeah.
we kind of sort of, I don't know if I want to say embrace, but we take on the
Mm-hmm.
sadness and we rejoice in the suffering, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We rejoice in the martyrdom and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we struggle with saying we're sad. It's like that
Yeah.
shame again,
Yeah.
but it's like, no, we have to be in touch with our emotions, So I just
Mm-hmm.
wonder how you could, like, from your perspective and your experience, how we could sort of rewire that as a community to teach
Mm-hmm.
that kind of theology/psychology in a
Mm-hmm.
healthy way, emotional spirituality, I would say.
Yeah. I think it goes back to what you said initially, is that we have to look at the perfect human, Jesus, and still one of the most powerful verses is 2 words: Jesus wept. That's it. It's so powerful of the intensity of emotion that made him weep, and not even cry, not just a couple tears, but weeping. That seems really powerful emotions. And then, as we just said, Gethsemane also, the intensity of emotion there, knowing what's about to happen the next day or in the morning. And, he carried his cross, even fell during carrying his cross. And we're going to fall too. We're going to fall too. And it's going to be okay. And someone helped him to lift the cross. So if someone can help him lift the cross, we can reach out to others to help us to lift our crosses too, which can be very, very heavy at times. Again, we live in a broken world. It's going to affect us at times. Other people are going to affect us. Their brokenness is going to affect our brokenness, and there's going to be pain at times. But if we help each other out as a global community, as groups in our churches or local communities, that will help tremendously as well. So look at Christ in his triumphs and in his pain as well. So there's no shame in the pain. We just need to help each other.
Mm. I like that. There's no shame in the pain.
Yeah.
I definitely looking to Christ and just supporting each other. I think
Mm-hmm.
the quote comes to my mind. I think it's in Ephesians, carry each other's burdens
Yep.
and fulfill the law of Christ.
Yeah.
And I think because we're wearing so many hats, it's hard to. But I know you did mention that we care for many other people. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that, but because we become so in our bubble that we forget
Mm-hmm.
that, and then
Yeah.
like the early church, everyone cared for each other. Everyone,
Yep.
no one had a need or lack. And I think that's ultimately God's design of the community, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and like I said, we're all broken, and we need to really
Mm-hmm.
rewire and revisit that. And what
Mm-hmm.
absolutely,
Yeah. Yeah. It's not meant for us to do it alone. I think right from Genesis 2, God said it's not good for man to be alone. So we're not meant to be alone. We have to help each other. But one of the first thing that goes is relationships. We detach, and that's not a healthy thing. So
yeah,
find a way to reattach, and within
yeah.
our communities, get rid of the stigma so that people can reattach.
I have 2 follow-up questions, if you may. I know we have a few more minutes.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, I know, do you find, I mean, I'm not sure how much you've seen outside of America, but like, do you find that more that people detach, from relationships more of like a Western kind of thing? I know, again, that's a
Mm-hmm.
very generalization, because obviously you look at like Eastern countries, or even in the South,
Mm-hmm.
South
Right.
America, countries that, when there's something like people are just flooding, and there's just always
Mm-hmm.
a support. I feel obviously
Mm-hmm.
it's a different sense of community, and obviously society, culture.
Yeah.
There's so many factors that. Yeah, I just wonder, is it more of a social, a cultural thing, or like
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's, I don't know how you could pinpoint that.
Yeah, so there's research on something called individualistic cultures, like the US, where it's more about I'm centered and
Yeah.
less community centered. But there's community, of course, but it's less community centered. And then there's collectivistic cultures, other countries that are much more community based or family based, and both have positives and negatives. Of course, some people in the collectivistic cultures don't feel enough autonomy, and some people in the autonomous countries feel they don't have enough community. So we need to bridge the two. And routinely, the countries that come out happiest, and there's, I think, a definition difference between happiness and joy. happiness being tethered to an event or a circumstance, joy being untethered to circumstances, just like a spiritual joy or things like that. But that aside, usually the Scandinavian countries come out the happiest of those. Usually Denmark is the happiest. And I recently was having this discussion with some students, and they had said that the reason is they have found the balance between the autonomy and the individualism and the collectivism. So they have longer maternity leaves and social programs to help new mothers and things like that. So there's less of the burnout, more of the happiness, but they also have the autonomy to, live freely or whatever, with free will. So they have found a happy medium or a balance between individualistic cultures and collectivistic ones. So maybe the rest of the world can learn from that somehow and implement some of their social policies and things like that. So it'd be interesting to look at that a little bit more closely, why they're happier and what that means.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Because when I travel, I just feel like, obviously you're traveling, so you don't live there, but it's just a completely different experience, especially if you go to like the Middle East completely. Like there's no privacy, obviously, we know. So
yeah, exactly.
And frozen. So no, that's super interesting. I guess my last question for now is there a way, I don't know if there's like a term or like a method, but is there a way to sort of measure stress? And how do we, oh gosh, it's one of those obviously intangible things, right? And how do we gauge it and how do we respond? I know there's kind of like, it's a multifaceted question.
Yeah, there are measures to measure stress. There are measures also to measure resilience. And there are measures that will help you to kind of understand things like depression and anxiety and things like that. And those are good gauges to where you fall on those scales. But the best gauge obviously is to have an awareness, self-awareness, to know when I'm struggling with something and to turn for help. So those things will give you some more ideas about, what's happening, but it's really important that you find a way to speak to the feelings that you're feeling and to find coping mechanisms, which we'll talk about in number 2 and number 3, to help us deal with this problem a little bit more, and to help us to reframe our thinking and reframe how we're living our lives so that it's more healthy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I was much needed. There's so much to be talked about. I'm excited for the upcoming 2 lectures. So those who are tuned in and who will be listening as well, make sure you tune in next Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, same place. To those who missed any of it or who want to share it, we will be uploading this video as well on Instagram, and I will be uploading as well to YouTube shortly. So you will see the whole recording, because I know not everyone can make the Instagram live. Again, Dr. Agaibi, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. It was so enriching, so much to think about, and so much to, reshape how we think and how we respond, and just really rewiring a lot of elements in our lives, and especially in our post-pandemic world. I think being really self-aware is crucial. And I pray with this ministry, with your prayers and your support too, that we can build resilience. We could also, in the future, short-term, long-term, incorporate more programs and local and global communities that we really support each other, because I think we need it more than ever on a local, personal level and on a global level. Again, reach out to Dr. Agaibi if you have other further questions through her Instagram account. I believe it's Agaibi, correct?
Agaibi, yeah. Same thing. Yeah. Agaibi.
And her website, caresilience.com.
Yeah.
Check out more of her scholarship there, and we will see you next Wednesday. Again, any further comments or questions, contact us. We'd love to hear from you, any feedback. And everyone have a great night, morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for tuning in. And Dr. Agaibi, have a great night.
You too. You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.